most weekends we have a period in the weekend where we're feeling good about the car, confident about the car, but then in the paying sessions, in qualifying and the race, that slips through our fingers.
Hi, I'm Cameron and I'm joined by James Allison to answer your questions about the Australian Grand Prix. So James, difficult weekend for the team. How do you and the rest of the team recover emotionally from races like this?
Well, I guess it depends a bit from person to person. In my case, I didn't go to Australia. I was following it from back here, so I'd had 3 nights awake when everyone else was abed. So come Sunday, very, very disappointing day. But really quite quickly, you just remind yourself that this is the very essence of the job we do. It's sport, and sport tests you in all sorts of ways. And actually, a day like this is when you find out who you are and who you are individually and who you are as a team. And so from my point of view, it was just gearing back up to come back into work, to get tucked in alongside my colleagues, each of whom had had their own individual journey of that disappointment, and then recovery and refocus. And we acknowledge what's happened. We try to accept without any sort of hiding from it where we are. And then we just get into understanding why it's like that, what we can do to fix it, and how we're going to get that sorted in time for the next race.
So I guess results like this don't happen that often for this team. What can we do to kind of review what we've learned to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Well, DNF, certainly, they're very thankfully a rare thing for us. We have drivers who are very good at keeping it on the island, and our reliability on the whole is a strong point. So yeah, unusual to have a double DNF like that, very, very unusual, and certainly not something we expect to punctuate our season. Actually, the thing we're more focused on is the pace, because if you get the pace sorted out, the season will be okay, whatever happens. And the baseline reliability of the car, our procedural approach to it, the skill of our drivers will tend to keep you clear of DNFs. So all our focus is on the pace, knowing that those other sort of foundational things are in decent shape.
So one of the questions we've had in is what exactly happened between FP3 and qualifying? Was it to do with tyre temperatures? Was it to do with the way we set the car up?
Well, certainly almost no setup changes between FP3 and qualifying. We take fuel out, of course, we turn the engine up to 11, all those things, but no significant difference on setup, because we actually felt we got the car in a decent window in FP3, and that was reflected in the timesheets. But we are starting to see a pattern emerge that most weekends we have a period in the weekend where we're feeling good about the car, confident about the car, but then in the paying sessions, in qualifying and the race, that slips through our fingers. And if we were trying to draw that pattern together, then probably the strongest correlation that we can make at the moment is that when the track is warm, when the day is at its warmest, and therefore the tyre temperature's lifting with that track temperature, that's when the competitiveness drops from us. So the times when we've been at our best have been all in the sessions which are the coolest. And so that gives us some clues about what we need to do as we move forward from here. But particularly the FP3 to qualifying in Melbourne was not a setup change.
So if we're trying to improve or find a better window for the car, is that a relatively simple change, or is it something way more complex?
Probably a bit of each, or probably better expressed in terms of the amount of time that will take. If you know what you're shooting for, if you've sort of identified correctly, let's say that's an accurate assessment of why our competitiveness waxes and wanes, well then you can work into the weekend a program that is dedicated towards trying to move the temperature and the temperature balance front to rear in your favour, using all the conventional setup tools on the car. And that's work you do back here in the factory, in the simulation and so on, calculations you can make. But if you conclude, having exhausted the degrees of freedom that you have available to you in setup terms, that you still need to go further, well then that gets harder at that point, because that will be that there are underlying characteristics in, say, the aerodynamic map that you've engineered, or the the suspension characteristic that is aggravating that particular feature. And in order to sort of make it really heal up nicely, then you would have to change those underlying features. So it can be either quick and dirty or a little more involved and a bit more complicated.
And talking about the work that goes on back at the factory, are we still seeing some correlation issues between what we're finding out in terms of simulation and what we're actually experiencing out on track?
Well, simple terms, yes. There are always correlation issues in every year, in every team, and there always will be correlation issues between what you see in the factory and what you see on the track, because the factory is a sort of reduced version of reality. It's not the same as driving a car on a real track, on the actual asphalt of the actual circuit with all its infinite detail and complexity. You have simplified models back here in the factory, and those simplified models are really powerful for steering you one way or the other, but all of them have their shortcomings and all of them have their correlation issues. In large measure, the models that we have, the simulation tools we have, are amazingly good at keeping us on the straight and narrow and guiding us towards more lap time. The devil's always in the detail. And in the particular area of the high to low speed balance that this car has, then we could do with some improvement in that area of the models, because there we've got some difference between what we're seeing on the track and what we're seeing back in virtual world. And those differences, if we can sort of bring them close together, then it just allows us to be more accurate with the projections we make back here and to address the things that we believe are holding the car back.
So going into the race strategy, why did Lewis start on the soft tyre?
If you tuned in and watched the race, you'd have seen almost everyone started on medium, a few on the hard, and Lewis was a bit of an outlier starting on the soft, and we knew he would be, absolutely knew he would be. But Lewis was a bit out of position on the grid and at a track that's not the easiest to overtake on. And the soft tyre, we felt, gave us a couple of useful advantages. First of all, soft tyre is better for starts, so you have half a chance of leaping one car forward with a soft tyre, and that one place is really precious. On a track that's tough to overtake, every overtake is a hard won thing, and if the soft tyre just gets it for you painlessly at the launch, then hooray for that. The second thing is that Melbourne is not without safety car risk in those early laps, and if you get your place in that launch, because you get a good launch, and then a corner or two later there's a safety car, well, you never expected that first stint to be very long, and you can just dip in the pits on your soft tyre and get onto the hard, because everyone else can't really do that, or they're not as able to do that as you are. So it's a better way of handling the risk of an early safety car. And I guess thirdly, it was going to be a two-stop race, and being a two-stop race with relatively high degradation in that first stint, no one was going to be going super long on either the medium or, in Lewis's case, the soft. So if he stopped a bit sooner than the people in front who are on mediums, that might actually give him a chance to undercut a car or so ahead of him doing that. He would pay for it a bit later on in the race, but with a car that was a bit out of position from qualifying, making those places early on in the race is a good sacrifice for that. So it was circumstance specific, being a bit out of position on a track that was definitely going to be a two-stop race, where there is the likelihood or a reasonable chance of safety car. All those things played towards making him it be a good option for going soft.
So do we know yet what caused Lewis's power unit to fail?
We do not. The power units, probably by the time you're watching this video, will all be safely in the hands of the guys at Brixworth, who will be able to figure out what let go. But right now, they're in boxes being winged our way as we speak. And all we know is the symptoms at the time, which was a rapid loss of oil pressure, followed by a shutdown of the engine to protect it, because when you know you've got catastrophic loss like that, the best thing you can do for the future is kill it there and then you haven't just got like a load of molten metal. You've got a fairly clear evidence chain of what caused it, and then that lets you work better for the future. So we don't know yet. Brixworth and HPP will do in short order, and no doubt as soon as we know, then they will jump to with their characteristic energy to make sure that any risk that happens on any other engine is mitigated as best we can.
Up until the point that Lewis unfortunately did have to retire, what was the view of his race pace, and do we know how the entire distance might have worked out for him?
Well, we know from his first stint that he was going along okay on those soft tyres. It was never going to be a long stint, but the car hung on to them adequately well compared with the estimates we'd made beforehand. He wasn't really on the medium tyre for long enough before retiring for us to have much intelligent things to say about that. But if you just take George's pace as a guide and say Lewis could have matched that, then my guess is he would have been on for something like 4 points.
So we've obviously got lots of races this year and they come thick and fast. What learnings can we take from this weekend for the races coming up in the near future?
Yeah, well, curiously enough, it was sufficiently a poor weekend to actually separate signal from noise to some degree. So you get a clearer indication of what's bedeviling you when it's as difficult as it was during Melbourne. So we're off to Suzuka next. It's a track with plenty of fast corners and also some slowish hairpins, so a real test of the car. And our job will be to make sure that we are attacking some of the things I talked about earlier in the video, specifically the tyre temperature issue, the high to low speed balance, and all the activities between now and then will be to try to work out in the simulator, in simulation, what we can do to influence those things. And we've got George here tomorrow working hard at trying to help us along that path. And then when we've got a clear manifesto for what we want to do, then it's making sure that we design the program for Suzuka so that we can execute that in the very limited time that there is available, and to make sure that we give enough time to getting stabilized temperatures on the tires, constructing a program that will allow us to check not just that the car is okay on single lap, but also it's okay over stabilized temperatures when we are more in sort of race mode. So that'll be the main thrust of what we're doing, and to try to make sure that we really seize the opportunity of this couple of weeks before Suzuka, that we get some reinforcement that we're on the right track in terms of seeing Suzuka pick up a little bit, and then that will give us more confidence when we head to the next one, which is a sprint race, and where the amount of time available at the track is that much lower still, and where you want to have sort of got a bit of certainty under you that you were on the right track, that the things we've been working on have been sort of nudging us in the right direction. Then that just gives you more confidence to push harder down that path in the following events.
Now, I know a lot of our fans will want to know how George is feeling after that incident at the end of the race. It was obviously incredibly tense for everyone watching. What was your take on it all?
Everyone who was watching the race will have heard George's frantic radio calls calling for a red flag, and I think rather than it being a red flag or a safety car or double waved yellow or whatever, what George was feeling was incredibly vulnerable. He knew he was in the middle of the track. He knew he was in a very fast part of the track with corners that may have unsighted anyone approaching him, and he was sort of positioned in such a way as he couldn't see any of the oncoming stuff, but he knew there were hurtling cars headed his way, so incredibly vulnerable position to be in, and that was the distress you heard from him, that vulnerability. What he couldn't know, of course, was how swiftly race control reacted to it, how swiftly the yellow flags came out, how quickly it went to a virtual safety car, and actually I think a very good response from the whole marshalling system to make sure that he was protected in what was a very vulnerable position. He couldn't know that. All he knew was he was sat there horribly exposed and wanted to let people know that in no uncertain terms. However, racing car drivers are racing car drivers. They are nothing if not brilliant at putting past and scary things in the past behind them and pushing on. He was completely back to his normal self within minutes of that happening. He was in the race debrief afterwards. You wouldn't have known that had happened. He'll be in the factory tomorrow working on the simulator, and they just move on from that sort of stuff. So yeah, an ugly few seconds, but not something that will be keeping him awake at night.